Victorian England, 1847. The gardens of Stuart Manor bloomed with exceptional vigour that spring, as if nature itself rebelled against the darkness that had settled over the grand estate since the late Earl of Stuart's passing. Amid the vibrant roses and delicate lilies, hidden behind thick curtains on the third floor, sat Lady Alice Stuart, her golden hair catching the weak afternoon light that managed to slip through the barred window. A well-worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets rested in her lap. At 20 years of age, Alice had grown accustomed to solitude. The servants whispered that she possessed the ethereal beauty of her late mother, the Earl's first wife, with eyes the colour of summer skies and a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Yet such beauty, rather than being celebrated, had become her curse. In the grand tapestries of Victorian London, some secrets are woven with silk and others with blood. But none were as dark as the one Countess Matilda Stuart kept behind a locked mahogany door. At Stuart Manor, the world was told a tragedy, that the eldest daughter had lost her mind. But the truth was far more sinister. Alice wore what had once been an exquisite gown of ivory lace and silk. Now it hung from her frame in deliberate tatters, the hem torn, the sleeves shredded, the bodice hanging loose where buttons had been ripped away. Her mother had destroyed it with her own hands, ensuring that Alice looked every bit the mad woman she claimed her to be. The door opened without warning. "Still cluttering the floor with those filthy books, I see." Countess Matilda Stuart entered like a storm cloud, her fashionable afternoon dress of deep emerald rustling dramatically against the wooden floor. At 37, the widow maintained her striking appearance through rigorous attention to the latest beauty treatments and fashions. Her posture was stiff, predatory, and her smile, when it came, was fixed and cold. Alice closed her book, but did not rise. "You gave me nothing else to occupy my time, Mother, unless you've finally decided to allow me a proper lamp. Reading by candlelight is damaging my eyesight." How dramatic. Matilda's heels clicked sharply as she crossed the room. "Though I suppose I should expect theatrics from someone with your delicate constitution." "My constitution is perfectly sound, and you know it." "Do I?" Matilda's voice dripped with false concern as she moved to the window, adjusting the heavy curtains to block even more light. "Because the physician I consulted last week seemed quite worried about your episodes, the violent outbursts, the hallucinations." Alice finally raised her eyes to meet her mother's gaze. "I have never had an episode, a violent outburst, or a hallucination. And we both know Dr. Butcher will say whatever you pay him to say." Matilda's hand shot out faster than Alice expected, gripping her daughter's chin with bruising force. "Listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful wretch. Everything I have done has been to protect this family's reputation from your shameful existence. Your father may have been fool enough to leave Thornfield to you, but I will be damned before I let a mad girl destroy everything I've built." I am not mad. Perhaps not yet." Matilda released her grip, and smoothing down her dress with practiced precision. "But your 21st birthday approaches, darling. After that, Thornfield becomes legally yours, unless you're deemed unfit to manage your own affairs." She moved toward the door, her threat hanging in the air like poison. "I suggest you use these next 7 months to reflect on your behavior. Cooperate. And perhaps I'll allow you to remain here. Continue being difficult, and I'll have Dr. Butcher's carriage at the door before dawn." The lock clicked with mechanical finality. Alice sat in the dimming light, her hands trembling against the leather binding of her book. Shakespeare's words swam before her eyes, but she could not read them. Instead, she thought of her father, The kind earl who had treasured her, who had taught her Latin and Greek, who had promised she would inherit everything he had built. 3 years. 3 years since his death. 3 years since Matilda had begun this systematic erasure. Below her window, she could hear the preparations for guests. Her mother was hosting another tea, another performance of respectability, while keeping her eldest daughter locked away like a shameful secret. Alice pressed her forehead against the cold glass and whispered into the silence, "Someone see me. Please, someone see me." She did not know that her prayer was about to be answered. Hello, everyone. Before we go deep into today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. 2 floors below, in the manor's grand receiving room, 18-year-old Cordelia Stewart stood before the gilt-edged mirror, while her lady's maid, Rachel, arranged her dark curls into an elaborate coiffure studded with pearls. "Miss Cordelia, you look like a princess," Rachel whispered, her freckled face bright with genuine admiration. Cordelia's reflection stared back at her with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. She wore a gown of pale rose silk that complemented her complexion perfectly, every detail selected by their mother to present the image of aristocratic perfection. But Cordelia's thoughts were 3 floors above, but locked behind a mahogany door. "Rachel," she said quietly, ensuring no other servants were near, "did you take the breakfast tray to my sister this morning?" Rachel's hands paused in her work. "Yes, miss, though the Countess gave strict instructions about portions again. Only bread and weak tea. She's starving her." Cordelia's voice was barely audible. "Miss Cordelia, I know what you shouldn't do." Cordelia turned from the mirror, her expression fierce despite her youth. "But I also know you have a good heart, Rachel. When you take the dinner tray tonight, add whatever you can from the kitchen. Hide it in your apron if you must. I'll tell cook to look the other way." Rachel's eyes widened with fear, and something else. Hope, perhaps, that someone was finally willing to act. "If the Countess discovers—" "She won't. I'll make certain of it." A sharp knock interrupted them. Matilda entered without waiting for invitation, her critical gaze sweeping over her daughter like a general inspecting troops before battle. "Perfect. The Pembertons have arrived and the Duke's carriage has just turned up the drive." She paused, her smile turning predatory. "The Duke of Wellington himself, Cordelia. Do you understand what this means? His support could secure our mining investments in Wales. His presence at our table elevates our standing. You will be charming, attentive, and above all, you will make no mention of your sister. Mother, I never— Good. See that it remains that way." Matilda adjusted a curl that had fallen loose from Cordelia's coiffure. "Now come. Your future, our future, depends on the next 2 hours." They descended the grand staircase together, but Matilda's hand resting possessively on Cordelia's arm. The entrance hall had been transformed into a showcase of wealth. Fresh flowers in crystal vases, silver tea service gleaming on mahogany tables, servants positioned at precise intervals like pieces on a chessboard. Through the receiving room windows, Cordelia caught a glimpse of the east wing. The windows there were different from the rest of the manor, barred, darkened, deliberately concealed behind overgrown ivy, that Matilda refused to have trimmed. Behind one of those windows, Alice was watching. Always watching. Never seen. The Duke of Wellington arrived exactly at the appointed hour. Nathan Wellesley stepped through the doorway, like a man accustomed to command, his military bearing evident in every controlled movement. At 32, he carried himself with the precision of someone who had earned his title through both birth and battlefield service in India. Raven dark hair framed a face that was more striking than handsome, all sharp angles and intelligent grey eyes that missed nothing. He wore a signet ring on his right hand that caught the light, gold and sapphire, bearing his family crest. "Your Grace, what an absolute honour!" Matilda swept forward with a curtsy calculated to convey respect without submission. "Welcome to Stuart Manor." "Lady Stuart." Nathan's voice held the cultured accent of Eton and Oxford, but there was steel beneath the polish. "Thank you for the invitation. May I present my daughter, Miss Cordelia Stuart?" Cordelia curtsied deeply, her rehearsed smile firmly in place. But when the Duke's eyes met hers, she saw something that made her breath catch, a sharpness, an assessment that seemed to look past the performance to the truth beneath. "Miss Stuart, a pleasure." "The honour is mine, Your Grace." "The Pembertons have already arrived," Matilda continued, gesturing toward the drawing room. "Shall we proceed to tea? I'm quite eager to hear your thoughts on the Welsh mining proposals." As the party moved through the grand hall, Nathan's gaze swept the manor's interior with the practiced eye of someone trained in military intelligence. The West Wing gleamed with recent polish and fresh paint, every surface perfect, every detail calculated for impression. But the East Wing stood in shadow, its entrance cordoned off with a velvet rope and a discreet sign. "Private, family chambers." "Your home is magnificent, Lady Stuart," Nathan remarked, some his tone casual. "The architecture appears to be early Georgian. You have a keen eye, Your Grace. My late husband's grandfather commissioned the original structure in 1720. Matilda guided them toward the drawing room, but Nathan had paused, his attention fixed on something at the far end of the hall. A mirror, antique, slightly tarnished, positioned at an angle that reflected the corridor leading to the East Wing. And in that reflection, for just a moment, a face, golden hair, summer sky eyes, a hand pressed against glass. Then she was gone. Nathan's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Years of intelligence work had taught him to catalogue irregularities, to notice what others overlooked. Stuart Manor had 2 daughters. The world only knew about one. "Your Grace?" Matilda's voice carried a hint of impatience. Is something wrong?" "Not at all." Nathan turned with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I was merely admiring the craftsmanship of that mirror. Italian, if I'm not mistaken? French, actually. A wedding gift from my late husband." Matilda's relief was palpable. "Shall we?" Tea proceeded with the choreographed politeness of aristocratic theatre. Lord and Lady Pemberton, a portly couple in their 50s, dominated the conversation with talk of their recent trip to Bath and their investments in the railways. Their son Edward, a pleasant but unremarkable young man of 23, made polite conversation with Cordelia, while his mother's eyes gleamed with matchmaking ambition. But Nathan's attention kept drifting. The drawing room's windows overlooked the eastern gardens, and beyond them, at the East Wing's barred windows, caught the afternoon light like accusations. "More tea, Your Grace?" Cordelia appeared at his elbow, silver pot in hand. "Thank you, Miss Stuart." Nathan watched her carefully as she poured. "Tell me, how long has your family resided at Stuart Manor?" "All my life, Your Grace. My mother married my stepfather when I was quite young." "Stepfather?" Nathan's interest sharpened. "I was under the impression the late Earl was your father." Cordelia's hand trembled just slightly. Hot tea splashed onto the saucer. "How clumsy of me." She set down the pot quickly, dabbing at the spill with a napkin. "I'm so sorry, Your Grace." "Cordelia is my daughter from my first marriage," Matilda interjected smoothly, appearing beside them as though summoned. "The Earl was kind enough to accept us both when we wed. He had a daughter of his own from his first marriage, but sadly, the girl passed away 2 years ago. Complications from a fever. We don't speak of it often. Too painful, you understand." Nathan understood perfectly. He understood that Matilda Stewart was lying. He understood that the face he'd seen in the window belonged to someone very much alive. And he understood, with the cold certainty that had served him well in far more dangerous situations, that something deeply wrong was happening in this house. "My condolences," he said quietly. "How terrible for you all." The tea continued for another hour. Nathan played his role flawlessly. The interested political ally, the eligible bachelor, the powerful man considering business investments. But his mind was already working through possibilities, strategies, the careful steps required to uncover a secret that Matilda Stewart had clearly killed her reputation to protect. When the gathering finally concluded, Nathan made his farewells with appropriate ceremony. But as he descended the front steps to his waiting carriage, he paused, turning back to survey the manor's facade. There. 3rd floor, eastern corner. A face appeared briefly in the window, silhouetted against the fading afternoon light. Golden hair caught the sun, and for just a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Nathan saw desperation, longing, a silent plea that carried across the manicured lawns like a scream. Then a hand, not hers, yanked the curtain closed. "Shall we depart, Your Grace?" His driver, James Matthews, waited by the carriage door. "Not yet." Nathan's jaw tightened with controlled fury. I need you to make some inquiries in the village. Quietly. I want to know everything about the Stewart family. Every servant, every tradesman, every whisper in every shop." "Yes, Your Grace." "Might I ask what we're looking for?" Nathan's gaze remained fixed on that darkened window. A ghost. A living ghost who someone is desperately trying to keep buried. That night, Alice sat in her chamber long after the candles had burned dangerously low, unable to sleep. She had seen him, the Duke, and more than that, he had seen her. For 3 years, she had been a shadow, a rumor, a convenient fiction. Visitors to Stewart Manor walked past her prison dozens of times without ever imagining someone lived behind those walls. Why would they? Matilda's performance was flawless, her lies so thoroughly woven into society's fabric that questioning them would have seemed absurd. But the Duke had looked at her window with recognition, with purpose, with something that felt dangerously close to concern. A soft knock at the door made Alice's heart jump. "Miss Alice? It's Rachel." Alice crossed the room quickly, pressing her ear to the wood. "Is my mother with you?" "No, miss. She's gone to bed, quite satisfied with herself." The Duke seemed properly impressed. Rachel's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I brought you some dinner. Real dinner, not that awful gruel." The key turned in the lock. Rachel had somehow gotten hold of it, and the young maid slipped inside, carrying a cloth-covered tray that smelled of roasted chicken, fresh bread, and vegetables that actually had flavor. "Rachel, we'll see if she catches you. Miss Cordelia said to make sure you ate properly. Said she'd handle the Countess if anything went wrong." Rachel set the tray on Alice's small writing desk, her freckled face earnest in the candlelight. "And there's more, miss. The Duke of Wellington was here today." "I know. I saw him from the window." Rachel's eyes went wide. "He saw you too, miss. I was serving tea, and I swear on my mother's grave, he asked about you. Asked the Countess whether the family had another daughter." Alice's pulse quickened, hope and fear warring in her chest. "What did my mother say?" "She told him you were dead, miss. Said you passed 2 years ago from fever." Rachel's hands twisted in her apron. But here's the strange thing. I don't think he believed her. He kept looking toward this wing of the house. And when he left, I saw him speak to his driver. They sat in that carriage for near 20 minutes just watching the manor, before they finally drove away. Alice moved to the window, her fingers trailing across the cold glass. Below, the garden stretched into darkness, silver with moonlight. Somewhere beyond those manicured hedges and wrought-iron gates lay a world she barely remembered, a world of ballrooms and morning rides, of laughter and music and freedom, a world her mother had stolen. "Rachel," she said quietly, turning back to face the maid, "do you know where my mother keeps my father's papers? The legal documents about the estate?" Rachel bit her lip, clearly torn between loyalty and fear. "In the library, miss, locked in his old desk, the one with the carved lion heads on the corners." "Could you get the key?" "That's a terrible risk, Miss Alice. If the Countess discovered..." "I know. But I need to see my father's will. I need to understand exactly what my mother is hiding, what she's so desperate to keep from me." Alice's voice grew stronger, steadier. "Because the Duke of Wellington is no fool, Rachel. If he's suspicious, he'll investigate. And when he does, I need to have proof of what's been done to me. Proof that I'm not the mad woman my mother claims, but the rightful heir to Thornfield." Rachel stared at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "I'll try, miss. But it might take a few days. The Countess keeps that key on her person most times. Then we wait, and we watch, and we prepare." Alice squeezed the maid's hand gratefully. "Thank you, Rachel, for everything, for seeing me when no one else does." "You're not mad, Miss Alice." You never were." Rachel headed for the door, then paused. "Your father was a good man. He wouldn't have wanted this for you, and I don't think he'd want us to stand by and let it continue." After Rachel left, relocking the door from the outside, Alice ate her first real meal in days. The food was simple, but tasted like hope, like possibility, like the beginning of something that might, against all odds, lead to freedom. 3 days later, Nathan Wellesley sat in his study at Wellington House, reviewing a stack of carefully gathered intelligence that would have done credit to his military reconnaissance units in India. His man James had been thorough. The village of Thornfield spoke of the Stuart family in hushed, careful tones. The late Earl had been beloved, generous, fair, a man who treated his tenants with unusual kindness, while his first wife, Lady Catherine, had died giving birth to their daughter Alice, but the Earl had cherished the child, raising her with all the advantages of her station, insisting she receive the same education as any son. His second marriage to the widowed Matilda Ashworth had been viewed with suspicion from the start. The woman was beautiful, ambitious, and brought her own daughter Cordelia to the union. But she had never been fully accepted by local society, always seen as an outsider, an interloper who had married above her station. Then the Earl had died. Suddenly, unexpectedly, at only 45 years of age. The official cause was heart failure. But the village doctor, a man named Aidan Wright, who had since retired to Bath, had apparently expressed private doubts at the time, doubts that were quickly silenced when Matilda appointed a new physician to the family estate. Dr. Butcher, a man with a questionable reputation and expensive tastes that exceeded his modest practice. And after the Earl's death, Lady Alice Stuart had simply disappeared from society. No more invitations, no more appearances at church or local gatherings. The rumors started almost immediately that the girl had inherited her mother's weak constitution, that grief had unbalanced her mind, that she was too delicate for the demands of public life. Within a year, most of society had simply forgotten she existed. Nathan set down the final report, his jaw tight with controlled fury. This wasn't neglect or even simple cruelty. This was systematic erasure. While Matilda Stuart was deliberately destroying her stepdaughter's existence to maintain control over an inheritance that should have passed to Alice on her 21st birthday. A knock at the study door interrupted his dark thoughts. "Your Grace, a message has arrived, marked urgent." His butler entered with a silver tray bearing a sealed envelope. The paper was cheap, the seal unmarked. Nathan broke it open to find a brief note in neat, feminine handwriting. "Your Grace, if you seek the truth about Stuart Manor, come to the Eastern Garden Gate at midnight tomorrow. Alone. The woman you saw in the window is not dead, but she will be if you do not act soon. A friend to justice." Nathan read the note twice, his strategic mind already assessing risks and possibilities. It could be a trap, but Matilda Stuart could have discovered his inquiries and planned an ambush to discredit him, or worse. But the handwriting didn't match Matilda's elaborate, affected script from the thank-you note she'd sent after the tea. This was simpler, younger, more earnest. Cordelia. The younger Stuart daughter was reaching out, risking her mother's wrath to help her sister. Nathan glanced at the ornate clock on his mantel. 24 hours until midnight. 24 hours to prepare for whatever waited for him in those gardens. He would be there, and he would be ready. The following evening arrived with agonizing slowness for everyone involved in the unfolding drama. At Stuart Manor, Matilda was in high spirits, as entertaining several society ladies in the drawing room with tales of her charitable work and Cordelia's promising prospects with young Lord Pemberton. The house buzzed with servants attending to the guests, laughter drifting from the receiving rooms. In the east wing, Alice sat by her window, watching the sun set over the gardens she could no longer walk through. Rachel had brought news that morning, whispered quickly while delivering breakfast, that Cordelia had made contact with the Duke, that something was being planned, that Alice needed to be ready. Ready for what? Rachel couldn't say, or wouldn't say, perhaps even didn't know. But the message was clear. Hope was coming. Alice had spent the day preparing herself mentally for disappointment. Hope was dangerous. Hope could break you more thoroughly than any locked door or torn gown. She had learned to survive by expecting nothing, by finding contentment in her books and the small kindnesses Rachel managed to smuggle past Matilda's watchful eye. But now hope had returned, uninvited and terrifying, and Alice couldn't quite crush it down. As darkness fell, Cordelia excused herself from her mother's gathering, claiming a headache. Matilda barely noticed, too occupied with impressing Lady Ashford and Jodie Story, a notorious gossip whose good opinion Matilda was desperately courting. Cordelia retreated to her chambers, but she didn't prepare for bed. Instead, she changed into a dark walking dress and cloak, her hands shaking as she fastened the buttons. Rachel appeared at her door without knocking, her face pale but determined. "Miss Cordelia, are you certain about this?" "No." Cordelia's voice was steady, despite her fear. "But I'm certain about what happens if I do nothing. My sister has been a prisoner for 3 years, Rachel. 3 years of my silence, my cowardice, my looking the other way, while Mother systematically destroyed her. I won't be silent anymore." "Then I'm coming with you." "Rachel, no. Someone needs to keep watch while you speak with the Duke," Rachel insisted. "And if your mother discovers you're gone, you'll need a witness to what was said. I'm coming, miss, and that's final." Cordelia stared at the young maid, barely 16 years old, with everything to lose and nothing to gain except the knowledge that she'd done the right thing. Then she pulled Rachel into a fierce embrace. "Thank you." They slipped from the manor through the servants' entrance, moving through shadows as Matilda's laughter echoed from the drawing room. The eastern garden gate stood at the far edge of the property, hidden from the main house by a thick stand of trees and overgrown hedges that Matilda had deliberately left untended. It was the perfect place for a secret meeting. Nathan arrived 15 minutes before midnight, approaching on foot through the neighboring estate's woods. He had left his carriage a quarter-mile away, taking precautions that were perhaps excessive, but had kept him alive during more than one dangerous mission in India. He wore dark clothing, carried no lights, and moved with the controlled silence of someone trained in covert operations. The garden gate was unlocked, but Nathan slipped through, positioning himself in the shadows of an ancient oak where he had clear lines of sight to all approaches. If this was a trap, he would see it coming. But the figure that appeared at midnight was no threat. Cordelia Stewart emerged from the darkness, wrapped in a cloak that made her nearly imperceptible. Behind her, nervous and watchful, came a young maid Nathan recognized from the tea gathering, the freckled girl who had served with such careful precision. "Miss Stewart," Nathan said quietly, stepping from the shadows. Cordelia startled, but didn't flee. "Your Grace, thank you for coming." "Your note suggested urgency. I assume this concerns your sister?" Even in the darkness, Nathan could see Cordelia's expression crumble with relief. "Then you know Alice is alive." "I suspected. Your mother's performance was convincing, but not flawless." Nathan moved closer, keeping his voice low. "Tell me everything, Miss Stewart. Leave nothing out." And Cordelia did. The words tumbled out in a desperate rush. 3 years of imprisonment, systematic starvation, deliberate isolation. The destroyed gowns and confiscated letters. The rumors of madness carefully spread through society like poison. Dr. Butcher's involvement, and Matilda's plans to have Alice declared incompetent before her 21st birthday, just 7 months away. "The inheritance," Nathan said quietly when she paused for breath. "Thornfield passes to Alice when she comes of age. Along with £40,000 and the mining shares in Wales that Mother is so desperate to control." Cordelia's voice shook with suppressed rage and guilt. "Mother has been living on credit for 3 years, gambling that she can either have Alice committed or—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Or make her actually dead, instead of just pretending she is," Nathan completed grimly. Cordelia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I've tried to help her. I sneak food to her chambers, bring her books, but Mother watches me constantly, and Alice grows weaker every day. Not in mind, she's still brilliant, still herself, but in body, in hope. She's starting to believe that no one will ever come for her, that she'll die in that room, and no one will even know to mourn her." Rachel, who had been standing watch, suddenly hissed a warning. Someone's coming! They froze, pressing back into the shadows. Through the garden paths, a figure approached, not from the manor, but from the village direction. A man moving cautiously, carrying a dark medical bag that caught the moonlight. Dr. Butcher. Nathan's hand moved instinctively to his coat, where he carried a small pistol. But the doctor didn't approach their position. Instead, he made his way toward the manor's servants' entrance, moving with the furtive guilt of someone engaged in questionable business. "He comes 3 times a week," Cordelia whispered, "to examine Alice and document her supposed episodes. Mother pays him handsomely for his false reports." Nathan watched the doctor disappear into the manor, his mind already working through new strategies. Dr. Butcher might be our key. Men like him serve whoever pays them, but they also understand self-preservation. If we can offer him protection and compensation greater than what your mother provides, or he might turn. But how do we approach him without Mother discovering? Leave that to me. Nathan turned back to Cordelia, his expression serious. But I need more than testimony from a paid physician. I need documented evidence of your mother's plans, preferably in her own hand. Letters, financial records, anything that proves her intent to defraud Alice of her inheritance. Cordelia reached into her cloak, withdrawing a folded paper that looked like it had been read and refolded many times. I copied this from Father's desk 3 months ago. It's his will. Alice inherits everything. Thornfield, the fortune, all of it. Mother receives only a modest yearly allowance as dowager. The original is still locked in Father's desk, but I've been watching Mother, learning her routines, waiting for the right moment to get more evidence. Nathan took the document, scanning it quickly by moonlight. The late Earl had been explicit in his wishes. Thornfield and all its associated wealth belonged to his daughter Alice Stewart, in sole possession, to do with as she pleased. Cordelia and Matilda were provided for, but modestly. Everything of real value went to Alice. This is excellent, Miss Stewart, but we need the originals, and we need any correspondence between your mother and Dr. Butcher that shows their conspiracy. Nathan paused, considering their next move. I need to see Alice. Speak with her directly, assess her condition, and ensure she's strong enough for what comes next. That's nearly impossible, Cordelia said desperately. Mother never leaves the manor unattended, and Alice is always locked. Tomorrow is Sunday. Your mother attends services at St. Mary's, does she not? Cordelia blinked. Yes, but Alice is always locked in during those hours, and Mother keeps the only key. Then we'll need a locksmith. Nathan's mind was already moving through logistics. Or better yet, someone who can pick a lock quickly and quietly. James, my driver, learned the skill during his time in His Majesty's Navy. He can open that door while your mother is occupied at church. Rachel suddenly spoke up, her voice small but determined. I can help, Your Grace. I know the manor's routines better than anyone. I can keep watch, signal if anyone approaches unexpectedly. Nathan studied the young maid with new respect. Thank you, Rachel. Your courage does you credit. He turned back to Cordelia. Here's what we'll do. Tomorrow, during services, while James and I will enter through the eastern gate, you'll ensure it's unlocked and that Alice is prepared for our arrival. We'll have approximately 2 hours while your mother is at church, enough time to speak with Alice, examine her condition, and search your father's desk for additional evidence. Your Grace, Cordelia said quietly, if Mother discovers this deception, she'll move Alice immediately, possibly harm her to prevent exposure. Are you prepared for that risk? Nathan's expression hardened into something that had once made enemy commanders reconsider their strategies. Miss Stewart, I've extracted intelligence assets from hostile territory with entire armies looking for them. I've negotiated truces between warring factions that wanted me dead. Your mother is formidable, I grant you, but she's not invincible. And I'm not leaving this county without seeing Alice Stewart freed from her prison and restored to her rightful position." The conviction in his voice seemed to give Cordelia strength. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin. "Then we do this tomorrow, during services. 2 hours to change everything." "Or start changing everything," Nathan corrected. "Freedom isn't a single moment, Miss Stewart. It's a process. But tomorrow, we take the first real step." He glanced at the manor's darkened facade, locating the barred window on the 3rd floor. "Tell Alice that I'm coming. Tell her that she's not forgotten, not abandoned, and absolutely not mad. Tell her that her father's legacy will be honored and her mother's crimes will be exposed." "I will." Cordelia managed a tremulous smile. "Thank you, Your Grace, for believing us, for caring about someone society has forgotten." "I haven't forgotten her," Nathan said quietly, his eyes still on that distant window. "And after tomorrow, I intend to make certain no one ever forgets Lady Alice Stewart again." They parted in the shadows, moving separately back to their respective destinations. Nathan returned to his carriage, where James waited patiently, ready to hear whatever mad plan his duke had concocted this time. Cordelia and Rachel slipped back into the manor through the servants' entrance, their hearts pounding with equal parts terror and hope. And in her locked chamber, Alice sat by her window, watching moonlight paint silver patterns across her floor, unaware that her rescue was finally, actually beginning. Tomorrow, everything would change, one way or another. Sunday morning dawned with deceptive tranquility, the sky a clear, brilliant blue that seemed to mock the darkness contained within Stewart Manor's walls. Matilda Stewart dressed for church in her finest black silk, the picture of respectable widowhood. Her jewelry, heavy pieces that had once belonged to the Earl's mother, glinted at her throat and wrists like chains. She adjusted her hat in the hall mirror, satisfied with the reflection that stared back at her. "Cordelia, we'll be late if you don't hurry." Cordelia appeared at the top of the stairs, moving with deliberate slowness. She wore a modest gown of pale blue, her expression carefully neutral despite the terror coursing through her veins. "I'm ready, Mother." "About time. The carriage is waiting." Matilda swept toward the door, then paused, her predatory instincts suddenly alert. "You seem nervous, darling. Is something troubling you? Just a slight headache, Mother. I didn't sleep well." "Perhaps you should remain home, then. Rest in your chambers." Cordelia's heart nearly stopped. If she stayed, Nathan's entire plan would collapse. "No, I'll be fine. Fresh air will help, and Reverend Williams always delivers such inspiring sermons." Matilda studied her daughter for a long moment, suspicion flickering across her features like lightning. But ultimately, she nodded curtly. "Very well. But if you feel faint during services, you're to tell me immediately. I won't have you embarrassing the family with a display." "Yes, Mother." They departed in the manor's elegant carriage, Matilda's satisfaction evident in the way she arranged her skirts and adjusted her gloves. The ride to St. Mary's would take 15 minutes. Services would last 90 minutes. Then the obligatory socializing afterward, another 30 minutes minimum. And as Matilda never missed an opportunity to network with the village's more prominent families. 2 hours and 15 minutes. Nathan and James were already waiting. The eastern gate stood unlocked, exactly as promised. Nathan and his driver slipped through like ghosts, moving with the practiced silence of men who had conducted covert operations in far more dangerous circumstances. Rachel met them at the servants' entrance, her freckled face pale but determined. "This way, Your Grace, quickly. Most of the staff have the morning free during services, but Cook is still in the kitchen, and she'll ask questions if she sees strangers." They moved through the manor's back corridors, Rachel leading them expertly around the occupied areas. The house felt different without Matilda's oppressive presence, quieter, but somehow more honest, out as if the building itself could finally breathe without her watchful eyes. The east wing loomed ahead, its atmosphere markedly different from the rest of the manor. Here, the walls showed signs of neglect, peeling paint, water stains, the musty smell of rooms left deliberately unattended. This was the part of Stuart Manor that guests never saw, the forgotten wing where shameful secrets were hidden away. "Third floor," Rachel whispered, starting up the narrow servants' stairs. "Last door on the left. It's locked from the outside, heavy bolt and key mechanism." James examined the door with professional interest, withdrawing a slim leather case from his coat. Inside were tools that looked innocent enough, but had far less innocent purposes. Lockpicks, tension wrenches, the equipment of someone who knew how to bypass security. "Oh, this'll take me maybe 3 minutes," James murmured. "Old lock, good quality but standard mechanism. Your Grace, perhaps you should announce yourself. We don't want to terrify the poor lady by bursting in unannounced." Nathan moved closer to the door, keeping his voice low but clear. "Lady Alice, my name is Nathan Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. I'm here with your sister's help. We mean you no harm. I'm going to have my man open this lock, and then I'd very much like to speak with you." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then softly, "Is this real? Or has my mind finally broken the way my mother always claimed it would?" The voice was cultured, intelligent, and carried such bone-deep weariness that Nathan felt his chest constrict with fury at what had been done to her. "It's real, my lady. I give you my word as a gentleman and as someone who has no patience for the cruelty that's been inflicted upon you." Another pause. Then please, if you can, open the door." James's picks worked with quiet efficiency. The lock clicked, the bolt slid back, and the door opened to reveal Lady Alice Stuart's prison. Nothing in the intelligence reports or Cordelia's descriptions had fully prepared Nathan for what he saw. The chamber was barely furnished. A narrow bed, a single chair, a small writing desk cluttered with books. The window was barred from the outside, heavy iron that would have required tools to remove. A bucket in the corner served purposes Nathan didn't want to contemplate. The walls showed water damage and mold, and the whole room smelled of damp and despair. And in the center of it all stood Alice. She wore what had once been an exquisite gown, ivory lace and silk that must have cost a small fortune. But someone had deliberately destroyed it, tearing the hem to tatters, ripping the sleeves, pulling threads loose until the whole garment looked like it had been salvaged from a rag-picker's cart. Her golden hair fell loose around her shoulders, unbound because she had no pins or combs to arrange it properly. But despite everything, the rags, the prison, the 3 years of systematic torture, Alice Stuart's eyes blazed with intelligence and defiant life. She was, Nathan realized with startling clarity, the most extraordinary person he had ever encountered. "Your Grace." Alice curtsied, the gesture technically perfect despite her circumstances. "Forgive my appearance. I wasn't expecting visitors, and my wardrobe is somewhat limited." The dry humor in her voice, the refusal to be pitied even in such circumstances, struck Nathan like a physical blow. This wasn't a broken woman. This was a fighter who had survived through sheer force of will. "Lady Alice," he bowed with absolute sincerity, "the honor is mine, and your appearance does you credit. Anyone who can maintain dignity in such conditions possesses strength most people never discover in themselves." A flicker of surprise crossed Alice's face, followed by something that might have been the beginning of tears. "You're kind. Kinder than I expected. Cordelia said you wanted to help, but I didn't dare believe her." "Believe her?" Nathan moved into the room, his fury at the conditions barely contained. "Miss Stewart, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer honestly. Can you do that?" "I've had nothing but time to practice honesty, Your Grace. Ask whatever you need." "How long has your mother kept you confined like this?" 3 years, since my father died. At first, she only kept me hidden during social events. But as my 21st birthday approached, the restrictions increased. For the past year, I've been locked in this room continuously, except when Rachel brings meals or Mother comes to remind me of my shameful existence. Nathan made mental notes of every detail. "Has she ever physically harmed you?" Alice hesitated, then slowly extended her wrists. Even in the dim light, Nathan could see the bruises, finger marks from being grabbed roughly, and deeper marks that suggested restraints. "Sometimes, when I argue or refuse to cooperate, she has Dr. Butcher apply manacles. She claims it's for my own safety during my episodes. But Your Grace, I need you to understand. I have never had an episode. I've never been violent or unstable. Every word of my mother's story is a calculated lie to justify stealing my inheritance." "I believe you." Nathan's voice was quiet but absolute. "And before this is over, the entire world will believe you too." Alice's knees seemed to give out slightly. She sank into the single chair, one hand pressed to her mouth as if physically holding back a sob. "I thought I was going to die here. I thought she would wait until just before my birthday, then have Dr. Butcher declare me incompetent, lock me away in some distant asylum where no one would ever find me. That's not going to happen." Nathan knelt so he was at her eye level. "But I need you to be strong for a little longer. Well, Lady Alice, we're gathering evidence. Your father's will, correspondence between your mother and Dr. Butcher, testimony from servants. When we have everything we need, we'll move decisively. But until then, you have to maintain the appearance that nothing has changed. Can you do that?" "How long?" "Days. Perhaps a week or 2 at most." Nathan held her gaze steadily. "I know that sounds like an eternity when you're locked in here, but rushing this could alert your mother and prompt her to take drastic action. We need to move carefully, build an unassailable case." Alice was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether she could truly trust this stranger who had appeared so suddenly in her hell. "Cordelia trusts you," she finally said. "And my sister, for all her youth, has good instincts about people. If she believes you're sincere, then I choose to believe it too." She straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin with visible effort. "I've survived 3 years, Your Grace. I can survive a few more weeks if it means genuine freedom at the end. You have my word that freedom is exactly what you'll get." Nathan stood, offering her his hand. She took it, and he helped her rise. Her grip was stronger than he expected, her palm calloused from the few books she'd been allowed to keep occupied. From the hallway, Rachel's urgent whisper, "Your Grace, we need to move to the library now if we're going to search the desk before the Countess returns." "Go," Alice said immediately. "Find whatever evidence you can." "But Your Grace?" She tightened her grip on his hand for just a moment. Thank you. For seeing me. For believing me. For being the first person in 3 years to treat me like a human being instead of a shameful secret to be hidden away. Nathan wanted to say something profound, something worthy of her courage. But time was short, and sometimes the simplest words carried the most weight. You were never shameful, Lady Alice. You were stolen. And I intend to see you returned to where you belong, standing in the sun, recognized by all, mistress of your own fate. He released her hand reluctantly and moved toward the door. James was already working to relock it from the outside, ensuring no trace of their visit remained. Rachel led them quickly toward the library on the ground floor, where the late Earl's desk waited with its secrets. Alice remained in her prison, but for the first time in 3 years, and she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Genuine, powerful, terrifying hope. And with it came the determination to survive whatever came next. The library was exactly as Cordelia had described, a gentleman's domain, lined floor to ceiling with books, dominated by a massive mahogany desk carved with lion heads at each corner. The desk was locked, of course, but James had become quite proficient with locks today. 2 minutes, he murmured, his picks working quickly. Nathan kept watch at the door, while Rachel hovered nervously nearby. Every moment in the manor was a risk, every second a chance of discovery. But the potential evidence in that desk could make the difference between freeing Alice and watching her disappear into an asylum forever. The lock clicked open. Inside the desk, but Nathan found exactly what he'd hoped for, and far worse than he'd feared. Letters, dozens of them, in Matilda's elegant script. Correspondence with Dr. Butcher, detailing plans to have Alice committed. Notes comparing various asylum facilities and their levels of discretion. Financial projections showing how much Matilda stood to gain by controlling Thornfield's income. But the most damning evidence was a letter dated just 5 days prior. Dr. Butcher, I grow impatient with this charade. Alice shows no signs of actual deterioration, which complicates our narrative. I propose we accelerate the timeline. A small dose of laudanum in her evening tea, increased gradually over several weeks, should produce the symptoms we need to justify immediate commitment. Once she exhibits genuine instability, thus we can proceed with the transfer to Yorkshire without fear of contradiction. Ensure your asylum contact is prepared to receive her by month's end. I will pay the additional fees you've requested, but I expect absolute discretion and permanent residence. I cannot risk Alice ever being released to challenge my control of the estate. Monsieur Stewart. Nathan's hands shook as he read the letter. Not just imprisonment, not just psychological torture. Matilda was planning to drug her daughter into actual madness, then lock her away permanently in an institution from which she would never escape. Your Grace, we need to go. Rachel's voice was tight with fear. Services will be ending soon, and if the Countess returns before, I'm taking these. Nathan gathered the most incriminating letters, his mind already working through how to use them. James, can you put everything back exactly as it was? Already done, Your Grace. They moved through the manor like ghosts, Rachel leading them back to the servants' entrance with the skill of someone who had navigated these halls her entire life. The eastern gate was still blessedly empty, and they slipped through just as the distant sound of church bells announced the un of services. In his carriage, Nathan sat with the stolen documents spread across his lap, his fury barely contained. Your Grace, James ventured carefully. What's our next move? We accelerate the timeline. Nathan's voice was cold, controlled, the tone he'd used when ordering troops into battle. Matilda Stewart plans to drug Alice and have her committed within 3 weeks. We're not waiting that long. I'm calling in favors, James. Every favor I've earned and every connection I've built. By this time next week, Alice Stewart walks free, or her mother answers to charges that will see her ruined completely. And if the Countess discovers we have her letters? Nathan's smile was sharp enough to cut. Then she'll learn that stealing a duke's interest and his documentation in the same week is a tactical error of catastrophic proportions. The carriage rolled toward London, carrying evidence that would either free an imprisoned woman or start a war among the aristocracy. Nathan was prepared for both. Matilda returned from church in excellent spirits, her social performance having gone exactly as planned. She had secured invitations to 3 upcoming events, spread carefully crafted rumors about Cordelia's prospects with Lord Pemberton's son, and received multiple compliments on her hat. Life was good when you knew how to manipulate people properly. "Cordelia, have tea sent to my study," she commanded as they entered the manor. "I need to review some correspondence, and I want you there to practice your penmanship. Your thank you notes still lack the proper flourish." "Yes, Mother." As Cordelia moved to request the tea, Matilda ascended to her private chambers to remove her church finery. But as she passed the corridor leading to the east wing, something made her pause. A sound. Faint, barely perceptible, but distinctly wrong. Matilda's predatory instincts sharpened immediately. She moved quickly toward Alice's chamber, her keys already in hand. The door was locked, exactly as it should be. She pressed her ear to the wood, listening. Inside, Alice was singing softly, something she often did when she thought no one could hear. The songs her father had taught her, melodies from happier times. Matilda unlocked the door and swept inside without warning. Alice was sitting by the window, a book in her lap, exactly where she should be. Nothing seemed out of place. The room was as wretched as always, the girl as pathetic as intended. And yet, something felt different. "Did you have visitors today, Alice?" Alice didn't even look up from her book. "Who exactly would visit me, Mother? You've spent 3 years ensuring the entire world thinks I'm either dead or mad. I'm hardly receiving callers for afternoon tea." The sarcasm was new, or rather, it wasn't new, but Alice had been more careful about hiding it recently, more beaten down. Now there was a spark in her voice that Matilda didn't like. "What are you reading?" "Hamlet. Again. I've memorized most of it at this point, but there's not much else to occupy my time." Alice finally looked up, and her summer sky eyes held challenge. "Though I suppose you could bring me new books, or allow me writing materials beyond this single candle and no proper ink, or perhaps just a window that isn't barred like a criminal's cell." Matilda's hand shot out, grabbing Alice's chin roughly. "You're quite bold today. Did something happen to give you such courage? Or have you finally lost what little sense you had left?" Alice jerked free, standing to face her mother directly. "Nothing happened, Mother. Except I woke up this morning and realized I'm tired of cowering. You're going to lock me away or kill me regardless of how I behave, so I might as well have the satisfaction of speaking truth before you succeed." The defiance was startling. Matilda had spent 3 years systematically breaking Alice's spirit, watching her daughter fade into hopeless resignation. This sudden resurgence was deeply troubling. "I think," Matilda said slowly, "it's time to move up our schedule. Dr. Butcher will be visiting this evening instead of his usual Thursday appointment. I believe a stronger treatment regime is needed to address your deteriorating condition." Fear flickered across Alice's face. genuine fear that Matilda found satisfying. But the girl didn't back down. "Do what you must, Mother. You always do." Matilda left, locking the door with more force than necessary. Something had changed. She didn't know what, didn't know how, but her instinct screamed that her carefully constructed control was slipping. In her study, she immediately penned an urgent note to Dr. Butcher. "Come tonight. Bring everything needed for immediate transport. Alice's condition has become acute, and I fear waiting any longer risks exposure. The Duke of Wellington has been asking questions, subtle but pointed. We move before he discovers anything that could complicate our plans." She sealed the letter and had it delivered by private messenger, marked urgent. Then she sat at her desk and began methodically reviewing her plans, looking for weaknesses, for anything that could unravel at the wrong moment. The forged will was safely locked away. The real will, the Earl's actual final testament that left everything to Alice, she had destroyed 3 years ago, keeping only the one altered document that proved Alice incompetent and named Matilda as a state guardian until such time as Alice recovered. The servants were controlled through fear and intimidation. The few who had questioned Alice's treatment had been dismissed without references, ensuring their silence through the threat of unemployment and poverty. Dr. Butcher was secured through blackmail. Matilda had documentation of his gambling debts and questionable medical practices that would ruin him if revealed. Every angle was covered, every risk managed, every loose thread tied off. And yet, the unease persisted. That evening, Dr. Butcher arrived as summoned, his weak chin trembling as he entered Matilda's study. He carried his black medical bag, and Matilda noticed his hands shook more than usual. "You seem nervous, Doctor." "I'm always nervous when you summon me urgently, Lady Stuart." Butcher set down his bag, not meeting her eyes. "Your note suggested we're accelerating the timeline. Alice has become difficult, bold, but something has shifted in her demeanor, and I don't like it." Matilda poured herself a glass of sherry, but didn't offer one to the doctor. "I want her moved to Yorkshire within the week. Can your asylum contact accommodate such short notice?" Butcher's face went pale. "A week? Lady Stuart, that's nearly impossible. The paperwork alone—" "I don't care about paperwork. I care about getting Alice permanently removed before anyone starts asking inconvenient questions." Matilda's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "The Duke of Wellington was here last week. He asked about my daughters. He looked at the East Wing with far too much interest. If he decides to investigate, if he investigates, we're both ruined." Butcher finally met her gaze, and Matilda saw genuine fear there. "Your Grace, the Duke of Wellington isn't some country squire you can intimidate, or some society matron you can manipulate. He has resources, connections, military intelligence training. If he's suspicious, then we move faster than he can act." Matilda stood, her decision made. "Tonight, you'll examine Alice and document whatever symptoms you need to justify immediate commitment. Tomorrow, I'll have the transport arranged. By this time next week, Alice will be in Yorkshire, and you'll be compensated handsomely for your cooperation." "And if the Duke has already started gathering evidence?" "What evidence could he possibly have? Alice is locked away where no one can reach her. My documents are secure. The servants are too frightened to talk." Matilda's confidence was absolute. Wellington is a decorated soldier, not a detective. Thus, he may suspect something is wrong, but suspicion without proof means nothing. But even as she said the words, doubt gnawed at her. Because Nathan Wellesley hadn't earned his reputation through luck, he'd earned it through being observant, strategic, and dangerously intelligent. If he was investigating Stuart Manor, he wouldn't do it openly or clumsily. He would gather his evidence carefully, build his case methodically, and strike only when success was certain, just like any good military commander. Matilda pushed the thought aside and focused on what she could control. Go examine Alice now. I want documentation of at least 3 acute symptoms that justify emergency commitment. And doctor? Her smile turned predatory. Make them convincing. Well, both our futures depend on it. Alice is literally fighting for her life and her sanity right now, and she has no one but us to witness her struggle. We spend hours crafting these stories to give a voice to the forgotten. If you've watched this far and haven't subscribed, you're leaving Alice alone in that dark room. Don't be like Matilda. Show some heart, hit that subscribe button, and like this video so Alice's story can reach the world. Are you really going to walk away now? Dr. Butcher climbed the stairs to Alice's chamber with a heavy heart and trembling hands. He had sold his integrity years ago when gambling debts threatened to destroy him, agreeing to Matilda's schemes in exchange for money and protection. But lately, the weight of his complicity had grown unbearable. Lady Alice Stewart wasn't mad. She had never been mad. She was intelligent, articulate, and showed no signs whatsoever of the violent instability her mother claimed. Every report Butcher filed was a lie. Every examination a performance designed to justify cruelty. And now Matilda wanted him to fabricate evidence for immediate commitment, a permanent imprisonment that Alice would likely not survive. He knocked softly before entering, giving Alice at least that small dignity. She sat by the window, still wearing the destroyed gown, her golden hair catching the last light of evening. When she turned to face him, Butcher saw no madness in her eyes, only weariness and a spark of defiance that reminded him uncomfortably of his own daughter, who was about Alice's age and lived safely in Bath, unaware of the moral compromises her father made to support her comfortable life. Good evening, Doctor. Butcher. Lady Alice. He set down his medical bag, unable to meet her gaze. Your mother has requested another examination. Of course she has. Alice's voice was bitter. And what symptoms will you document this time? Hallucinations? Violent tendencies? Suicidal ideation? You've already used all the classics. Perhaps you should invent something new to keep your reports interesting. The accusation stung, because it was true. I'm sorry, Butcher heard himself say. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Alice. Truly, Lady Alice, I'm sorry for my part in this. Alice studied him for a long moment. Then stop participating. Refuse my mother's demands. Tell the truth about what's been done to me. I can't. She'll ruin me. I have debts, obligations, a daughter who depends on my income, and I have nothing, no freedom, and no future, no life beyond these walls. Alice's voice cracked slightly. Your daughter has a father who supports her, Doctor. I had a father who loved me, and my mother murdered that memory along with everything else he built. So forgive me if I find your self-preservation less compelling than my survival. Butcher flinched as if struck. Before he could respond, footsteps sounded in the corridor, rapid, urgent. Rachel burst through the door, her face flushed and frightened. Doctor, forgive the interruption, but she stopped, noticing Alice, and her eyes went wide with warning. But it was too late. Behind Rachel came Matilda, her expression thunderous. What exactly is happening here? Rachel, you have no business in this wing of the house. I brought fresh water for Lady Alice's washing, ma'am, Rachel said quickly, or indicating the pitcher she'd hastily grabbed before running upstairs. I saw the doctor arrive and thought he might need— You thought wrong. Get out. Rachel fled, but not before catching Alice's eye and making a small gesture, a tilting of her head toward the window, a signal Alice didn't understand, but filed away for later consideration. Matilda turned to Butcher, her voice cold. "Well, Doctor, have you completed your examination?" "Not yet, Lady Stewart. I've only just arrived." "Then do it now. I'll wait." Matilda settled into the single chair, as if she owned not just the room, but Alice herself. The examination proceeded with clinical coldness. Butcher checked Alice's pulse, her reflexes, looked into her eyes with practiced disinterest. All the while, he was intensely aware of Matilda's watchful presence and Alice's quiet dignity. When he finished, he retreated to the far corner of the room to write his report, knowing exactly what Matilda expected to see documented. His hands shook as he wrote lies that would seal a young woman's fate. But as he wrote, a decision crystallized in his mind. He couldn't continue this. Wouldn't continue this. No amount of debt was worth destroying an innocent woman's life. The question was how to stop it without destroying himself in the process. After Matilda and the doctor left, Alice remained by the window, watching darkness settle over the gardens. She felt the walls closing in with new urgency. Her mother was accelerating whatever plan she had, and Alice's defiance earlier had likely made things worse rather than better. The soft scratch at her door made her turn quickly. "Oh, Miss Alice?" Rachel's whisper came through the crack beneath the door. "Are you near the door?" Alice crossed quickly, pressing close to the wood. "Rachel, what's happening?" "I heard them talking, miss. Your mother and the doctor. They're planning to move you to an asylum in Yorkshire. Soon. Maybe as early as next week." Rachel's voice trembled. "They spoke of midnight transport, of having you drugged for the journey so you can't resist or call out for help. Miss Alice, you need to run. You need to escape before they can take you." Alice's heart hammered. "Run where? I'm locked in, watched constantly. Even if I got out of this room, my mother would hunt me down." "The Duke," Rachel interrupted urgently. "Miss Cordelia has been in contact with him. He's gathering evidence against your mother, building a case. But I heard him say it would take weeks to do it properly. You don't have weeks, miss. You have days at most." Alice pressed her forehead against the door, her mind racing. Everything in her wanted to believe that Nathan, the Duke, would arrive in time to save her. But she had learned the hard way not to rely on rescue. She needed to save herself. "Rachel, can you get a message to Cordelia? Tonight?" "I think so, miss. What do you want me to tell her?" "Tell her to contact the Duke immediately. Tell him my mother is moving faster than he anticipated, and if he's going to act, it needs to be now, not in weeks or days. Now." Alice paused, steadying her voice. "And Rachel, thank you. For everything. For seeing me when everyone else looked away. You're not mad, Miss Alice. You never were. And if there's any justice in this world, soon everyone will know it." Rachel's footsteps retreated down the corridor, and Alice was alone again with her fear and her desperate, fragile hope. She returned to the window, looking out at the darkness, and began to plan. If Nathan couldn't reach her in time, she would find a way to reach him, even if it meant risking everything in one final, desperate gamble. That same night, miles away in London, Nathan received an urgent message delivered by a rider who had clearly pushed his horse to dangerous speeds. He broke the seal and read Rachel's hastily scrawled warning, and his blood ran cold. "James," he called, already moving toward his study. "Wake the household. We ride for Thornfield immediately. And send word to my aunt, Lady Grace. Tell her to prepare her townhouse for a guest who may arrive in distress and who will need protection, medical care, and legal sanctuary. Your Grace, it's past midnight, which is why we leave now, before Matilda Stewart can execute whatever horror she's planning. Nathan was already pulling maps, making calculations. If we ride through the night, we can reach Thornfield by dawn. James, I need you to do something else. Ride to Bath and find Dr. Aidan Wright, the physician who served the late Earl. Offer him whatever compensation necessary to return to Thornfield and testify about the Earl's death and Alice's condition before Matilda's interference. You think the Earl was murdered? I think everything about Matilda Stewart's story deserves investigation. But first we save Alice. Then we destroy the woman who tried to bury her. As his household erupted into organized chaos, Nathan stood at his study window, looking toward the distant countryside where Stewart Manor waited in darkness. "Hold on, Alice," he whispered into the night. "I'm coming, and this time, I'm not leaving without you." The race against time had begun. The night was moonless, which Matilda considered auspicious for her purposes. Dr. Butcher had returned to the manor at 11 o'clock, bringing with him 2 orderlies from the Yorkshire asylum, large, silent men whose faces suggested they had experience restraining difficult patients. They waited in the entrance hall while Matilda reviewed the final arrangements. "The carriage is ready?" she asked James Matthews, her driver, who stood uncomfortably near the door. "Yes, ma'am. Prepared for a long journey." "Good. We'll have Alice sedated before transport to avoid any unfortunate scenes. Doctor, you have the laudanum prepared?" Butcher held up a small brown bottle, his face pale and sweaty despite the cool night air. "Yes, Lady Stewart, but I must warn you, transporting someone in a heavily drugged state carries risks. If the dose is too strong, then be careful with your measurements." Matilda's voice was ice. "I want her unconscious but alive, Doctor. Can you manage that, or do I need to find someone more competent?" "I can manage it." "Excellent. Then let's proceed. Cordelia is safely asleep in her chambers. The servants have retired for the night, and we have several hours before dawn to complete this business." Matilda started toward the stairs, then paused. "And, gentlemen, if Alice attempts to resist or cry out, you are authorized to use whatever force necessary to secure her. I won't have her hysterics waking the household." The orderlies nodded, their silence somehow more menacing than any verbal agreement. What none of them knew was that Rachel had not retired for the night. Instead, she crouched in a dark alcove near the servants' stairs, watching the preparations with terrified eyes. As soon as the group moved toward the east wing, she fled upstairs to Cordelia's chambers. "Miss Cordelia," Rachel shook her employer's shoulder urgently. "Wake up! They're moving Lady Alice tonight. Right now!" Cordelia jerked awake, her mind fogging with confusion that quickly sharpened to panic. "Tonight? But the Duke said we had more time." "We don't. Your mother, the doctor, and 2 large men are heading to Lady Alice's chamber right now. If we don't do something immediately, she'll be drugged and locked away before the Duke can even reach Thornfield." Cordelia threw off her covers, her heart pounding. "Help me dress, quickly. We need to get to Alice before they do." "Miss Cordelia, what can we possibly do against armed orderlies and your mother?" "I don't know." Cordelia pulled on a simple day dress with shaking hands. "But I refuse to hide in my room while my sister is stolen away. At the very least, I can slow them down, create enough delay for something, for help to arrive, for a miracle." They raced through the manor's corridors, but Matilda had a head start. By the time Cordelia reached the east wing, she could hear the lock turning in Alice's door and hear her mother's cold voice instructing the orderlies to secure the patient. "No!" Cordelia burst into the chamber, just as the two large men advanced on Alice, who had backed into the corner, her face white but defiant. "Cordelia, get out!" Matilda snapped. "This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't! Alice is my sister, and you're not taking her anywhere." Cordelia moved to stand between the orderlies and Alice, her slight frame pathetically inadequate, but her courage absolute. For a moment, Matilda simply stared at her daughter, shock giving way to fury. "You dare defy me?" "I've been defying you for months, Mother. Sneaking Alice food, bringing her books, stealing your documents to give to the Duke." Cordelia's voice shook but held firm. "Did you really think I would stand by forever while you tortured my sister?" Matilda's hand cracked across Cordelia's face with enough force to snap her head sideways. "You ungrateful little traitor! After everything I've done for you, every advantage I've secured, you've done nothing but lie and manipulate and destroy." Cordelia touched her reddening cheek, but didn't back down. "And now everyone knows it. The Duke has your letters, Mother. Your correspondence with Dr. Butcher, your plans to drug Alice, your forgery of Father's will. It's over." The words landed like artillery shells. Matilda's face went white, then red, then a mottled purple that suggested apoplexy. "That's impossible. My study was locked, my desk secure. Locks can be picked, documents can be photographed, and powerful men have resources you can't imagine." Cordelia grabbed Alice's hand, pulling her toward the door. "We're leaving, right now. And if anyone tries to stop us, they'll be complicit in crimes that the Duke of Wellington has sworn to prosecute." The orderlies hesitated, looking to Matilda for instruction. But Matilda was staring at her younger daughter with something approaching genuine shock, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You've been working against me all along." "Only after I finally found the courage to work for what's right." Cordelia pulled Alice past the frozen tableau, Rachel joining them as they fled into the corridor. "Come on, we need to reach the east gate before they recover." Behind them, Matilda's scream of rage echoed through the manor. "Stop them! I don't care how. Stop them now!" The orderlies thundered in pursuit, their heavy footsteps shaking the floorboards. Cordelia led the desperate flight through the manor's twisting corridors, her knowledge of the house their only advantage. They took shortcuts through servants' passages, ducked through storage rooms, anywhere that might slow their larger, less familiar pursuers. But the orderlies were professionals, and Matilda knew the house as well as her daughters. The escape route was rapidly narrowing. They burst from the manor's eastern entrance into the gardens, cold night air shocking their lungs. The gate stood 50 yards away. 50 yards of open ground with no cover, no concealment, nowhere to hide. "Run!" Cordelia gasped, her hand locked around Alice's wrist. They ran. Behind them, the orderlies emerged from the manor, gaining ground with their longer strides. Dr. Butcher appeared at the doorway, still clutching his bottle of laudanum, looking torn between flight and complicity. And then, like an answer to prayers Alice had stopped daring to pray, lanterns appeared at the eastern gate. A carriage. No. 2 carriages. One elegant and clearly expensive, the other more utilitarian but equally well-appointed. From the first carriage stepped Nathan Wellesley, his face grim and determined in the lamplight. Behind him came his driver, James Matthews, followed by an older gentleman Alice didn't recognize, Dr. Aidan Wright, though she didn't know it yet. From the second carriage emerged 2 constables and a man in formal legal robes who could only be a magistrate. Nathan had brought an army. "Alice!" His voice carried across the garden with absolute command. "Well, keep coming. You're safe now." The orderlies slowed, suddenly uncertain. They had signed on to transport a mad girl, not to assault the Duke of Wellington and officers of the law. Cordelia, Alice, and Rachel stumbled the final yards to the gate, where Nathan caught Alice as her legs finally gave out from exhaustion and terror, and relief so intense it felt like breaking. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair, his arms solid and safe around her. "You're safe. I've got you." Matilda appeared at the manor entrance, her face a mask of fury and dawning comprehension that everything, absolutely everything, had just collapsed around her. Nathan gently transferred Alice to Lady Grace's waiting arms in the second carriage, then turned to face Matilda with an expression that would have made enemy commanders reconsider their life choices. "Countess Stuart," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "I am Nathan Wellesley, Duke of Wellington. With me are Constable Morris and Constable Davies, as along with Magistrate Harrison. We are here to investigate allegations of unlawful imprisonment, fraud, and attempted conspiracy to commit false medical commitment." Matilda drew herself up, trying for aristocratic hauteur. "This is absurd. That girl is my daughter, and she's unwell. I was merely arranging appropriate medical care." "Save your lies for the magistrate, Lady Stuart." Nathan's voice could have frozen hellfire. "I have in my possession your correspondence with Dr. Butcher, detailing plans to drug Lady Alice into compliance. I have testimony from dismissed servants about your systematic abuse. I have Dr. Wright's professional opinion that Alice shows no signs whatsoever of mental instability. And I have a copy of your late husband's true will, which you forged in order to maintain control of an estate that never belonged to you." Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Matilda's face went from red to white to grey. "You're lying. You have nothing." "Then you won't mind if Magistrate Harrison examines your study and desk?" Nathan's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Gentlemen, if you would." The constables moved toward the manor. Matilda tried to block their path, but one of her own orderlies, clearly deciding his employment wasn't worth obstruction of justice charges, stepped aside to let them pass. Alice watched from the safety of the carriage, Cordelia holding her hand on one side, Lady Grace on the other, as her mother's empire of lies crumbled in real time. Nathan approached the carriage, his expression softening when he looked at Alice. "How are you holding up?" Alice tried to find words adequate for what she felt. Terror, relief, disbelief, gratitude so intense it hurt. "I'm free. For the first time in 3 years. I'm actually free." "Not quite yet," Nathan said gently. "There will be legal proceedings, testimony, probably weeks of paperwork. But the danger is over, Alice. Your mother can't touch you anymore, and by the time we're finished, everyone in London will know exactly what was done to you and exactly who is responsible." From the manor came the sound of shouting, Matilda's protests growing increasingly shrill as the constables emerged carrying armfuls of documents from her desk. "Your Grace," Constable Morris called, "you'll want to see this. Letters, financial records, everything you described and more." Nathan squeezed Alice's hand once, gently, and then turned to address the disaster unfolding at the manor. But Alice barely noticed. She was staring at the eastern horizon, where the first faint light of dawn was beginning to break. She had spent 3 years locked in darkness, but now, finally, impossibly, the sun was rising, and she was going to be free to walk in it. The journey to London took most of the day, and Alice spent it in a state of exhausted disbelief, unable to fully process that her nightmare had actually ended. Lady Grace Adams proved to be exactly what Alice needed. A woman of fierce intelligence and practical compassion who managed to be both comforting and bracing in equal measure. She didn't fuss over Alice or treat her like a broken thing. Instead, she spoke to her as an equal, discussing the legal strategy ahead and what Alice would need to rebuild her life. "The first order of business," Grace said as their carriage rolled through London streets, "is getting you properly fed and rested. You look half-starved, my dear, and no amount of legal justice matters if you're too exhausted to enjoy your freedom." "I can't quite believe it's real," Alice admitted. "Part of me keeps expecting to wake up in that locked room, with all of this just a dream." "It's real. Though I understand the disbelief, 3 years is a long time to live in captivity." Grace studied Alice with the sharp eyes of someone who missed little. "Your nephew speaks very highly of you, Lady Alice. He's been absolutely relentless in gathering evidence against your mother. I don't think I've ever seen Nathan so personally invested in a case." Alice felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He saved my life. I'll be forever grateful." "Gratitude is a good start," Grace said with a knowing smile, "though I suspect there might be more than gratitude involved on both sides." Before Alice could respond to that dangerously perceptive observation, the carriage pulled up to an elegant townhouse in one of London's finest neighborhoods. The door bore a brass plaque, "Adams House." Inside, Alice was introduced to a flurry of efficient servants who had clearly been briefed on her situation and treated her with careful respect rather than pity. A bath was drawn, fresh clothing provided. Real clothing. Beautiful gowns in Alice's size that Grace had commissioned based on Cordelia's descriptions. "How did you have these made so quickly?" Alice asked, running her fingers over silk that wasn't torn or stained. "I have excellent seamstresses and deep pockets," Grace said practically. "And more importantly, I have absolute confidence that justice will prevail, which meant you would need a proper wardrobe for your return to society. Can't have you looking anything less than magnificent when you face down your mother in court." The bath was luxury Alice had almost forgotten existed. Hot water, proper soap that smelled of lavender, the privacy to soak without fear of interruption or humiliation. She washed 3 years of grime and degradation from her skin and hair, watching the water turn grey with the evidence of her imprisonment. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a dressing gown softer than anything she'd worn in years, she found Cordelia waiting in the adjoining room, looking anxious. "Alice, may I come in?" "Of course." Alice opened her arms, and Cordelia flew into them, both sisters finally able to embrace properly without bars or locked doors between them. "I'm so sorry," Cordelia sobbed against Alice's shoulder. "I should have acted sooner. Should have been braver. Should have—" "You saved me," Alice interrupted firmly. "Tonight, when it mattered most, you stood between me and Mother's orderlies. You risked everything to help me escape. Cordelia, you were so brave." I was terrified. Bravery doesn't mean not being frightened. It means acting despite the fear. Alice held her sister tighter. "Thank you. For seeing me when it was easier to look away. For choosing what's right over what was comfortable." They held each other for long minutes, years of separation and pain, finally able to begin healing now that the immediate danger had passed. Later that evening, after Alice had rested and eaten her first proper meal in what felt like forever, Nathan arrived to check on her progress. Grace admitted him to the drawing room where Alice sat by the fire, wearing a gown of deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Her hair had been properly dressed by Grace's lady's maid, and for the first time in years, she looked like the aristocratic lady she had been born to be. Nathan stopped in the doorway, and Alice watched recognition and something deeper flash across his face. "Lady Alice. You look—" He seemed to struggle for words. "Well, you look well." "I look human again," Alice said with a small smile. "Thanks to your aunt's considerable efforts and your even more considerable courage." She stood, suddenly uncertain. "Your Grace, I don't know how to begin to thank you for what you've done." "Oh, you risked your reputation, your safety, your standing in society. I risked nothing compared to what you endured," Nathan interrupted gently. He crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that Alice could see the silver flecks in his grey eyes. "And I didn't do it for thanks, Lady Alice. I did it because what was being done to you was unconscionable, and because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because from the moment I saw your face in that window, I couldn't stop thinking about you, about who you were, what you'd survived, what you might become if someone just gave you the chance to be free." Alice's heart was doing complicated things in her chest. "I thought about you too. In that locked room, after you visited, I would replay our conversation over and over. You were the first person in 3 years to look at me and see someone worth saving rather than a shameful burden. You were never a burden, Alice. You were stolen. And I'm honored that I could play even a small part in seeing you returned to where you belong." Grace cleared her throat from the doorway, where she'd been watching with undisguised interest. "Nathan, dear, stop making moony eyes at Lady Alice and tell us about the legal proceedings. What happens next with Matilda?" Nathan reluctantly pulled his gaze from Alice to address his aunt. "Magistrate Harrison is reviewing all the evidence tonight. Based on the documents we recovered and Dr. Wright's testimony, he's prepared to charge Matilda Stewart with fraud, unlawful imprisonment, and attempted medical conspiracy." "Doctor, a butcher has agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. Apparently his conscience finally caught up with his greed." "Will there be a trial?" Alice asked, trying to process the idea of facing her mother in a courtroom. "Almost certainly. But Lady Alice, you should know, you won't face her alone. I'll be there. My aunt will be there. Cordelia will testify on your behalf. And I've retained the best solicitor in London, Aidan Wright's son, who happens to specialize in inheritance law and has a personal interest in seeing your father's true will honored." "When?" "The preliminary hearing is set for next week. That will determine whether there's sufficient evidence to proceed to a full trial." Nathan's expression grew serious. "It won't be easy, Alice. Your mother will fight this with everything she has. She'll try to discredit you, or claim you're exactly the madwoman she always said you were. Are you prepared for that?" Alice thought of 3 years in a locked room. 3 years of systematic torture designed to break her spirit. 3 years of surviving when giving up would have been so much easier. "I'm prepared," she said quietly. "I've faced my mother at her worst. Facing her in a courtroom with the law on my side will be almost pleasant by comparison." Nathan's smile was warm with admiration. "That's my brave Alice. My Alice." The possessive pronoun hung in the air between them, noticed by everyone present, but remarked upon by no one. Grace stood, stretching with the satisfied air of someone who had just watched a particularly enjoyable performance. "Well, I believe I'll retire for the evening. Lady Alice, what you should do the same. You need rest far more than you need legal strategy sessions. Nathan, you may stay for 30 more minutes to discuss whatever additional matters require discussing, and then you will take your leave and allow my guest to recover properly." She swept from the room, leaving Nathan and Alice alone for the first time since her rescue. The silence stretched, comfortable, but charged with something neither of them quite knew how to address. "Alice," Nathan finally said, moving closer. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without feeling any obligation to respond in kind." "All right." "I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment I saw your face in that window. Not because you needed rescuing, though God knows you did, but because even imprisoned and abused, you maintained a dignity and intelligence that took my breath away." His voice was quiet, intense. "These past weeks, getting to know you through Cordelia's stories and your own words during that brief meeting in your chamber, have only deepened what I feel. But Alice, you've just escaped through 3 years of captivity. The last thing you need is another man trying to control your choices or push you into something you're not ready for." Alice looked up at him, this powerful man who had saved her, and was now carefully, thoughtfully offering her the one thing she'd been denied for so long: choice. "Nathan," she said softly, using his given name for the first time. "May I tell you something?" "Always." In that locked room, I used to imagine what freedom might feel like. I imagined sunlight and music, and the simple pleasure of walking wherever I chose. She moved closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. But I never imagined this, never imagined someone who would see me, truly see me, and choose to care about what happened to me. You gave me back more than my freedom, Nathan. You gave me back my humanity." She rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek, chaste but loaded with meaning. "I don't know what the future holds, or what I'll want once I've had time to properly heal from what was done to me. But I know that I want you in that future, in whatever capacity you're willing to be there. Friend, ally, advocate." She pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes with a shy smile. "And perhaps, when I'm ready, something more." Nathan's hand came up to cup her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "I'll be whatever you need me to be, Alice Stewart, for as long as you'll have me." They stood there in the firelight, not quite lovers, but definitely more than friends, and let themselves imagine a future that was finally, miraculously possible. The preliminary hearing drew half of London's aristocracy, us all eager to witness the scandal that had consumed their social circles for the past week. Lady Alice Stewart, supposedly dead for 2 years, had returned from the grave to accuse her stepmother of fraud, imprisonment, and attempted murder by medical incompetence. The story had everything society loved: secrets, betrayal, a dashing duke as hero, and a villainess of operatic proportions. Alice sat in the courtroom between Nathan and Lady Grace, wearing a gown of pale grey that somehow made her look both dignified and heartbreakingly young. Her golden hair was styled simply, her manner composed, despite the scrutiny of hundreds of eyes. Across the room, Matilda Stewart sat with her own solicitor, a weaselly man named Mr. Carstairs, who had built his reputation on defending the indefensible. Matilda wore black as though in mourning, and her face a mask of wounded motherly concern. She was putting on the performance of her life. Magistrate Harrison called the court to order, and the proceedings began. The prosecution, led by Dominic Mann, Dr. Wright's son and one of London's most respected solicitors, laid out the case with devastating precision. He presented the Earl's true will, which left everything to Alice. He showed the forged document Matilda had created. He walked the court through 3 years of systematic abuse, documented in letters Matilda had foolishly preserved. "The evidence shows," Mann stated clearly, "that Countess Stewart deliberately imprisoned her stepdaughter for 3 years with the explicit intention of driving her to actual madness, or failing that, of having her falsely committed to an asylum from which she would never return. This was not a mother's misguided concern for an ill child. This was calculated, cruel, and criminal. Matilda's solicitor countered with claims that Alice had been genuinely unstable, that Matilda had only been trying to protect both Alice and society from her violent episodes, that the whole affair was a tragic misunderstanding being exploited by opportunistic fortune hunters. The Duke of Wellington, Carstairs suggested with barely concealed insinuation, has been notably attentive to Lady Alice since her supposed rescue. One might wonder if his interest is truly in justice, or if perhaps he sees an opportunity to acquire a wealthy estate through marriage to a traumatized, vulnerable young woman. Nathan half rose from his seat, fury blazing across his face, but Alice caught his hand and squeezed gently. "Don't," she whispered. He wants you to react. Don't give him the satisfaction." Nathan subsided, but his glare promised that Carstairs would regret his words at a later, more private time. The testimony phase began. Dr. Aidan Wright took the stand first, his professional authority unquestionable. "I treated Lady Alice from birth until my retirement 3 years ago," he stated clearly. "She was a healthy, intelligent child who showed no signs whatsoever of mental instability. Her father doted on her, ensured she received the finest education, and was quite explicit in his intention to leave her his estate and fortune." "And what about the Earl's death?" Mann asked. "Did you observe anything unusual?" Wright hesitated, then spoke carefully. "The official cause was heart failure, but the Earl was only 45, showed no prior signs of heart trouble, and died very suddenly, just 3 months after his marriage to the current Countess Stuart. I expressed concerns at the time about the possibility of poisoning, but I was dismissed from the family's service before I could pursue the matter." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Matilda's face went white, then red. "Lies!" she called out. "How dare you suggest—" "Lady Stuart, control yourself or be removed from the court," Magistrate Harrison warned sternly. Rachel testified next, her voice shaking but clear as she described the conditions in which Alice had been kept. The torn gowns, the starvation rations, the manacles used to restrain her when she protested. Cordelia's testimony was perhaps the most damaging. She spoke of overhearing her mother's plans, of watching Alice's systematic destruction, but of the guilt that had finally driven her to contact the Duke for help. "My mother," Cordelia said quietly, "told me repeatedly that Alice was mad and dangerous. But I knew my sister. I'd known her all my life. She wasn't mad. She was convenient. And my mother needed her out of the way to control an estate that was never hers to claim." Finally, it was Alice's turn to testify. She walked to the witness stand with her head held high, refusing to show the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. Nathan's eyes tracked her every movement, his silent support a tangible thing. Mann began gently, establishing Alice's identity and her relationship to the late Earl. Then he guided her through the 3 years of her imprisonment, allowing her to tell her story in her own words. Alice spoke clearly, without dramatics, describing the systematic erasure of her existence with a matter-of-fact precision that was somehow more powerful than any emotional appeal could have been. "My mother," she said, and the courtroom fell absolutely silent, "told me repeatedly that I was a shameful secret, a stain on the family name. She destroyed my clothing to make me look mad. She spread rumors about my instability to anyone who would listen. She kept me locked in a single room with minimal food, no proper sanitation, and no contact with anyone except her maid and Dr. Butcher, who documented whatever symptoms my mother paid him to fabricate. "Were you ever violent?" Mann asked. "Never." "Did you ever hallucinate or suffer from delusions?" "Never." "Then why, Lady Alice, do you believe your mother did this to you?" Alice's gaze moved to Matilda, holding her stepmother's eyes with quiet steel. "Because my father left me his fortune, and my mother wanted it for herself. It's that simple and that cruel. I was an obstacle to be removed, nothing more." Carstairs tried to discredit her during cross-examination, implying that her 3 years of isolation had affected her judgment, suggesting she was being manipulated by the Duke, questioning her memories and perceptions. But Alice had survived 3 years of systematic psychological torture. A lawyer's verbal attacks were nothing compared to that. "Mr. Carstairs," she said calmly after he'd implied for the 3rd time that she might be misremembering her experiences, "I spent 3 years with nothing to do but read, think, and remember. My memory is excellent. My judgment is sound, and I am absolutely certain that my mother locked me away with the intention of either driving me mad or having me falsely committed. Those are the facts, regardless of how you try to spin them." The gallery erupted in murmurs of approval. When Dr. Butcher took the stand, his testimony sealed Matilda's fate. In exchange for leniency, he provided detailed accounts of every fabricated report, every false symptom, every instance where Matilda had explicitly instructed him to document evidence of madness that didn't exist. "She wanted Alice drugged," Butcher admitted, his weak chin trembling. "Wanted her transported to an asylum that would keep her permanently, regardless of her actual mental state. I went along with it because she was blackmailing me over my gambling debts. But I can't do it anymore. I can't live with what I helped her do to that girl." By the time the testimony concluded, Magistrate Harrison's decision was obvious to everyone in the courtroom. "Based on the evidence presented," he stated formally, "I find sufficient cause to proceed with criminal charges against Countess Matilda Stewart for fraud, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. The defendant will surrender her passport and remain in London pending trial. Lady Alice Stewart is hereby recognized as the rightful heir to the Stewart estate, and all claims by the Countess to said estate are suspended pending resolution of these charges." The gallery erupted. Matilda screamed something that was lost in the noise. Her solicitor was already gathering his materials, clearly calculating whether this case was worth his continued involvement, whilst Nathan's hand found Alice's, squeezing gently. "It's over," he murmured. "The first battle at least. You won, Alice." Alice stared at the magistrate, at the courtroom, at the society that had forgotten her for 3 years and was now avidly devouring her vindication. "I won," she whispered, as if testing the words. Then louder, stronger. "I won." For the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to smile. Not a bitter smile or a sad smile, but a genuine expression of triumph. She had survived. She had been freed. And now she had been publicly vindicated. The restoration was beginning. 3 months later, on the evening of Alice's 21st birthday, Stewart Manor blazed with light for the first time since the Earl's death. Alice had spent the intervening months carefully rebuilding what her mother had destroyed. The east wing had been completely renovated, bars removed from windows, walls repainted, the oppressive atmosphere replaced with light and beauty. She had hired new staff to replace those Matilda had dismissed or intimidated into silence. She had reviewed every account, every investment, every detail of the estate her father had left her. And she had begun, slowly and carefully, to re-enter the society that had forgotten her. It hadn't been easy. Despite the trial's verdict, despite Matilda's conviction and sentencing to 10 years in prison for fraud and imprisonment, whispers still followed Alice through London's ballrooms. People stared, whispered, speculated about what 3 years of captivity had done to her mind. But Alice had learned something important during her imprisonment. She didn't need everyone's approval. She only needed the respect of people who mattered, and those people increasingly included London's most powerful families, all of whom had been impressed by her dignified handling of the trial and her intelligent management of her estate. Nathan had been a constant presence throughout her recovery, though he'd been careful to give her space to heal and find herself without his influence. They had fallen into an easy companionship that somehow felt deeper than any dramatic romance. Hours spent discussing literature and estate management, quiet walks through Hyde Park, comfortable silences that needed no words. Tonight, for her 21st birthday celebration, Alice descended the grand staircase of Stuart Manor, wearing a gown of ivory and gold that made her look like a queen. Her golden hair was dressed with pearls, her mother's pearls, the ones Catherine Stuart had worn on her wedding day. Cordelia had found them in storage and insisted Alice wear them tonight. The ballroom below was filled with London's elite, all gathered to witness Alice's official restoration to society. Lady Grace Adams held court near the refreshment tables, efficiently managing introductions and ensuring that everyone understood Alice Stuart was under the protection of one of London's most powerful families. But it was Nathan who waited at the base of the stairs, devastatingly handsome in formal evening wear, his eyes never leaving Alice's face as she descended. "Happy birthday," he murmured when she reached him, offering his arm. "How does it feel to finally claim everything that's rightfully yours?" "Strange, wonderful, terrifying." Alice accepted his arm, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Part of me still expects to wake up and find this all a dream. It's real. Every beautiful, terrifying, wonderful bit of it." Nathan guided her toward the ballroom, but paused at the threshold. "Alice, before we go in there and face society's scrutiny, I need to ask you something." "All right." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "These past 3 months, watching you rebuild your life and reclaim your place in society, would have been the happiest of my life. Not because I played any role in your success, that's all you, but because I've had the privilege of knowing you, of watching you transform from a prisoner to a force of nature." Alice's heart began racing. "Nathan, let me finish." He took both her hands in his. "I told you months ago that I was falling in love with you. That hasn't changed. If anything, I've fallen deeper. But Alice, you deserve the chance to choose your own future, free from any obligation or pressure. So I'm asking, when you imagine your future now, what do you see? What do you want?" Alice looked up at him, this powerful man who had saved her, and then carefully, deliberately, given her space to save herself. She thought about the months of companionship, the quiet moments that had meant more than any grand gesture. She thought about how safe she felt in his presence, how challenged and respected and truly seen. "I see you," she said simply. "If you're asking whether I love you, Nathan Wellesley, the answer is yes. I have for months, but I needed time to be certain I was choosing you freely, not out of gratitude or dependence. And I am certain. I choose you. I love you. And if you're about to ask me what I think you're about to ask me, the answer is yes to that too." Nathan's smile could have lit the entire ballroom. "I haven't actually asked yet." Then perhaps you should hurry up about it before I lose my nerve." He laughed, then pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket and opened it to reveal a ring set with sapphires the exact color of Alice's eyes. "Lady Alice Stuart, you are the bravest, most remarkable person I've ever encountered. You've survived horrors that would have broken lesser souls, and you've done it with grace and strength that leave me in awe. I love you desperately, completely, and with every intention of spending the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you. Will you marry me?" "Yes." Alice's voice was steady, certain. "Absolutely, yes." Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, and then in front of half of London's aristocracy, who had gathered in the hallway to witness this development, he kissed her. It was everything their first kiss should have been. Passionate, tender, full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, the assembled crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Lady Grace appeared beside them, her expression satisfied. "Well, it's about time you two stopped dancing around each other. Now, shall we adjourn to the ballroom for the actual party? We have an engagement to celebrate, along with a birthday." The evening passed in a blur of congratulations, dancing, and joy. Alice waltzed with Nathan, with Cordelia, with Dr. Wright and his son Dominic, with half a dozen society gentlemen who wanted to show their support for the remarkable Lady Alice Stuart. As midnight approached, Nathan found Alice on the terrace, where she'd stepped out for a moment of quiet away from the celebration. "Overwhelmed?" he asked, joining her at the balustrade. "Wonderfully so." Alice leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders. "A year ago, I was locked in a room with no hope of escape. Tonight, I'm celebrating my birthday and my engagement with half of London society. Oh, it's almost too much happiness to process. You deserve every bit of it." Nathan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You've earned this freedom, Alice. Never forget that." They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out over the gardens that bloomed with the same rebellious vigor as they had on that first day Nathan visited Stuart Manor. The night was full of possibilities, futures yet to be written, victories already won, and dreams still to chase. Behind them, the manor that had been Alice's prison now stood as her palace, transformed from darkness to light by sheer force of will and the refusal to surrender to cruelty. Alice Stuart was finally, completely, beautifully free. And she intended to spend the rest of her life living as loudly and brilliantly as possible, making up for every moment that had been stolen from her. "Oh, thank you," she whispered to Nathan. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was hidden. For believing me when I was called mad. For giving me the tools to fight back and then letting me do the fighting myself." She turned in his arms to face him. "You gave me more than freedom, Nathan. You gave me back myself. You were always there, Alice. You never lost yourself, no matter how hard your mother tried to take it from you." His hand cupped her face gently. "I just helped clear away the obstacles so everyone else could see what I saw from the beginning. An extraordinary woman who deserved to live in the light." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring the moment and the future stretching before them. From the ballroom, music drifted through the open windows, a waltz, bright and joyful. Alice took Nathan's hand, pulling him back toward the celebration. "Come on, let's dance. I want to dance every dance tonight, just because I can." "Your wish," Nathan said with a smile that held all his love and admiration, "is absolutely my command." They rejoined the party, two souls who had found each other in darkness and chosen to walk together into the light. And in Stuart Manor, which had witnessed so much cruelty and suffering, joy finally, triumphantly reigned. Alice has finally found her light, but there are so many more stories waiting to be told. Stories of the hidden, the forgotten, the deliberately erased who deserve to have their voices heard. If you want to see the downfall of more villains and the rise of more heroes who refuse to surrender, make sure you're part of our community. Subscribe now, hit that like button, and tell us in the comments what part of Alice's journey resonated most with you. Did Matilda get the justice she deserved? Your engagement helps us continue bringing these powerful stories to light. Thank you for standing with Alice. Thank you for refusing to let her remain hidden. I will see you in my next video.